The village of Inturo rested between thick forests and sloping hills, wrapped in the green hush of nature's breath. It was a place where the old ways ruled, and where laughter was rarely kind. The elders said dreams were for the foolish and songs were for ceremonies only, not for the wandering whims of girls in the woods. Here, tradition was law, and silence was considered strength. Zola was anything but silent. Each morning, she rose before the birds and stepped barefoot through the mist toward the trees. A woven basket hung over her arm, meant for firewood, but more often it stayed half empty because her mind wandered where her feet did. Her voice would rise before the sun had properly climbed the sky, spilling through the forest like ribbons of gold light. She sang to the leaves, to the cool stones, to the breeze that kissed her cheeks. She sang even when no one listened, especially then. But someone always did. The villagers called her strange. Mad like her mother, they whispered, with tongues dipped in bitterness and fear. Women pulled their children away when she passed. Men shook their heads. Another season wasted, one said. That girl will bring ruin like the last one. Zola heard them but never answered. Words, she had learned, could be turned into shields if left unanswered. So she sang louder. Her voice wasn't just sweet, it was strange. It had a pull, like the river's current. It made you pause even when you didn't want to. The birds noticed first. They would flutter near, perching on branches too close for comfort, blinking at her like they understood. Then came the butterflies, golden and blue, hovering over her head as if the notes from her mouth had weight. Once, she sang near the edge of the woods and a deer limped from the brush, wounded and frightened. Its leg was torn by a hunter's trap, and its breath came short. Zola didn't run. She knelt, still singing, and watched the animal rest beside her feet. Her song turned slow, a lullaby of wind and hope. When she stopped, the deer was asleep. She took the cloth from her waist and wrapped its leg gently, humming as she worked. When it rose and limped back into the green shadows, she felt a strange ache in her chest, like something old and waiting had knotted deep in the forest. But when she returned to the village that day, someone had seen her. Talking to beasts now, an old woman scoffed. Next you'll be flying like the witches of the cliffs. Laughter followed her like a shadow. Still, Zola didn't reply. She simply looked toward the forest and smiled quietly. In her heart, she knew the trees listened better than the people. Her mother, Amelie, had once been the same. A gifted singer with a voice that shimmered through the market streets. But after the drought, the one that ruined the harvest years ago, the elders blamed Amelie's voice for stirring angry spirits. They said her singing cursed the rains. Overnight, she went from beloved to outcast. And then, without a word, she disappeared into the forest and never returned. Zola didn't remember her well, but she remembered the sound. A hum at night when sleep didn't come. A lullaby that lived in her bones. Now, that voice was hers. Some nights, the wind carried harmonies no one else heard. When she sang, even the leaves seemed to sway in rhythm. There was something in her voice that defied silence, something old, something sacred. In Inturo, they feared what they could not explain. But in the woods, under trees older than any elder, Zola's voice belonged. And something was always listening. In Inturo, ridicule had rhythm. Children did not simply mock, they sang their teasing in exaggerated high notes, mimicking Zola's voice whenever she passed. "Oh, the trees are crying again," one boy would shout, cupping his hands like a drum while others joined in. "Hide your goats, Zola's going to charm them into flying," the others laughed, stomping the dirt to make it part of the performance. Zola never answered. She kept her eyes on the path ahead, basket in hand, lips tight until the trees swallowed her. But the laughter, even when it faded, echoed inside her longer than she liked to admit. She continued to sing, even as the mockery thickened around her like smoke. Her voice would rise as the sun dipped below the trees, spinning long trails of song into the air like spider silk. She sang because she needed to, like breath, like heartbeat. But even she couldn't deny the sting when laughter followed her home. The adults were no kinder, only quieter with their cruelty. The women at the well would click their tongues when she walked past, muttering things about spirits not meant to be stirred. Some warned her outright. "You sing like you're tempting something," said Mama Rua, the midwife who delivered half the village. "That kind of pride always leads to curses." "I don't sing for pride," Zola had answered softly. The woman shook her head. "Then you sing for nothing." The men, too, watched her with narrowed eyes and whispered of her mother with bitterness. Emily had been beautiful, bold, and full of music, and they'd loved her once. Until the famine. Until the need to blame someone outweighed their need for truth. And now they saw Emily and Zola, too much voice, too much presence. Once, Zola had dared to sing during the harvest festival. She'd been only 10 then, small and trembling, her dress patched with care and hope. Her grandmother had brushed her hair and whispered, "Sing with your bones, child. Not just your lips." She stood on the wooden platform while the drummers played behind her. The chief's daughter had just finished her stiff little recitation of an old praise song, and Zola thought, perhaps, if she sang from the heart, they would feel what she felt. But the first note had barely left her throat when someone giggled. Then someone mimicked it with a goat bleat. Laughter swelled like a rising tide, cruel and unstoppable. She stumbled through the first verse, eyes stinging, voice cracking, then ran from the stage. That night, she buried her face in her grandmother's lap and cried until sleep took her. Nanalumo was the only soul who never mocked her. Though her eyes had faded into cloudy stillness years ago, she saw Zola clearer than anyone. "Your voice," she'd told her once, brushing her hand over Zola's throat, "is not meant to be understood by those who fear it. It carries something the ears cannot hold." Zola had blinked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means it is not your job to be small enough for them. You are a drum made of wind and memory. Some ears were never meant to hear you." Then, more softly, she added, "Before your mother vanished, an old traveler came to my door. He had eyes like river stones. He said someone in our bloodline would sing before kings, and the world would hush to listen." Zola had scoffed gently. "There are no kings here." "Not yet," Nanalumo said with a secret smile. Later that week, Zola went to the woods again after the jeers became too much. She sat by the hollow log where moss grew thick and cool. The trees loomed overhead, ancient and patient. She did not sing at first. She sat in silence, biting her lip, shoulders trembling from the effort of holding it all in. The laughter still rang in her ears. She tried to ignore it, tried to forget the twisted faces of the boys and girls who thought cruelty was a game. But the silence grew too heavy. So she sang. Not the bold songs she sang when walking, not the playful hums or the chants of old women. She sang something softer, older, a lullaby with no words, just sound. The tune her mother had hummed to her long ago in the dead of night, the one Nanalumo said had no known beginning. Her voice quivered, but then it steadied. The wind rustled as if listening. A single bird chirped in perfect answer. Her tears still fell, but the song rose anyway, curling through the branches, lifting to the stars. The moon above was a sliver, but its light touched her face like a gentle hand. Alone in the forest, in sorrow and music, Zola found the ache turning into something else. Not joy. Not yet. But something close. A quiet defiance. A melody that could not be caged. The rains had been kind that season, gentle, steady, and cleansing. The fields sang green, and the rivers rolled like living silver. As tradition demanded, the village of Inturo began preparations for the Festival of Rain Spirits, a yearly celebration filled with dance, food, and offerings meant to thank the sky for its mercy. But this year, something shifted. One dry morning, just as women gathered at the well and men prepared hunting tools, a messenger arrived on horseback. He wore the blue silk sash of Makunda's royal house and carried a carved staff that glinted in the sun. His voice, clear and formal, rang through the village square. "The Crown Prince of Makunda," he announced, "will pass through Inturo on the final day of the rain festival." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The prince? Here? Inturo was small, distant, unremarkable. Royals did not walk their dusty roads. But now, a chance had fallen like ripe fruit into their laps. A chance for recognition, glory, favor. Perhaps even land or protection. The village chief, Ikambo, puffed out his chest like a frog ready to bellow. "We will welcome him with honor," he declared. "Let the festival be the finest ever seen in these lands." He called a council that very evening and assigned roles. Dancers were chosen from among the most graceful girls. Drummers were handpicked from families of reputation. The praise song, an old hymn meant to honor the spirits, and now, cleverly, the prince, was to be sung by Akambo's own daughter, Ayanda. She was pretty enough, poised enough, and, most importantly, his own blood. Zola's name was never mentioned. She stood in the back of the crowd that night, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, listening to instructions passed down like law. Her grandmother sat beside her, silent, unmoving. The message was clear: Zola was not to participate. She didn't protest. She didn't expect to be included anymore. But the sting came anyway, sharp and familiar. And it deepened each day as the preparations unfolded. Dancers practiced in the square, adorned in bright fabric and ankle bells. Men crafted wooden masks with painted eyes and curled horns to honor the spirit of the rain. Ayanda practiced her song in the chief's compound, guarded by woven walls and sharp stairs. Zola tried to stay away. She spent her time in the forest, collecting fallen branches and humming to the silence. But one afternoon, on her way back to the village, she paused near the side of the chief's compound. A hole in the fence let through the sound, Ayanda's voice, clear but unsure, reciting the words of the sacred praise song. Zola knew the melody well. She had heard her mother sing it long ago with reverence and precision. As Ayanda stumbled over a line, mispronouncing the name of the sky guardian, Zola winced. She couldn't help it, she spoke. "It's not Mbara, it's Mbara," with a low tone. "Otherwise, it means sickness instead of strength." The words left her mouth softly but with certainty. Silence. Then Ayanda's face appeared through the gap in the fence, twisted in offense. "Why are you spying?" "I wasn't," Zola answered. "I was just passing. I heard the song in." Before she could finish, Ayanda pushed the fence open, stepped out, and slapped her across the face. Zola staggered back, stunned. Ayanda's eyes flared. "Don't correct me. Ever. This is not your place." "It never was." A sharp laugh came from behind her. Two of the dancers had seen the exchange and joined Ayanda. "The singing witch wants to teach the chief's daughter," one said mockingly. Zola blinked tears from her eyes but didn't let them fall. She turned and walked away, head high, the sting on her cheek burning like flame. That evening, the drums echoed through the village, deep and pulsing with excitement. The festival was just 2 days away. Lights flickered in every compound. Laughter and scents of roasted yam and spiced millet filled the air. But Zola didn't join the celebrations. She wandered instead into the woods, guided only by moonlight. The trees welcomed her, always. They never asked her to be quiet. Never slapped her for knowing. She stopped by a clearing where the wind always seemed to hum. There, she sang. Her voice carried the same words Ayanda had butchered, but this time the notes were right. The tone was deep and powerful, each syllable a spell. Her version of the praise song was slower, older, shaped by memory, not instruction. The leaves trembled with each verse. The wind shifted. She sang not to please anyone, but because the song itself wanted to be sung. Unbeknownst to her, just beyond the tree line, someone stood listening. A figure cloaked in travel-stained robes, his horse tied loosely nearby, watched her with quiet amazement. He had been following the sound, faint and haunting, for half a mile. When he reached the clearing and saw the girl standing in the moonlight, surrounded by trees that leaned as if to hear better, he did not speak. He dared not interrupt. Instead, he placed a hand over his chest and whispered, "That voice, it sings to the bones." Then he turned quietly, unnoticed, and disappeared into the shadows. The morning after her moonlit song, Zola returned to the forest, drawn not by duty but by longing. Something had shifted in her. The sting of Ayanda's slap had faded, but what lingered was a strange warmth, like the song had answered her back. Like it had given her something no applause ever had, peace. She wandered deeper than usual, to a part of the woods where the trees grew thick and vines wrapped around trunks like sleeping serpents. The birds were quiet there, and the air held a hush that made every sound feel sacred. Her feet found a clearing, one untouched by footprints, carpeted with moss and dappled sunlight. She closed her eyes and began to hum. Her voice rose gently, a ribbon curling into the canopy. She sang no particular words, only sound, raw and full of longing. The kind of singing that made silence lean forward. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't alone. A man stood at the edge of the trees. He wore dark, embroidered robes, too fine for a traveler, and a cloak that shimmered faintly when he moved. He wasn't old, but his posture carried weight, and the way he stood, calm, observing, unafraid, was unlike any villager Zola had ever seen. Her voice caught. She took a step back. He didn't move toward her. Instead, he bowed his head slightly and said, "Don't stop." Zola stared. "Who are you?" The man offered a small smile. "Just a traveler. Though not the kind that's welcome in every village." His voice was smooth, his accent refined, like someone educated far beyond the borders of Enturo. He studied her for a moment, then said, "You sing like you know the truth behind thunder." Zola blinked, confused. "I don't understand." "You will," he replied. "One day." There was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. He stepped forward into the clearing, slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "What's your name?" he asked. Zola hesitated. In her village, her name was a weapon, often thrown back at her with laughter. It was the name of the girl who sang too much, the daughter of a vanished curse. So she answered honestly. "I am Zola," she said softly. "Daughter of no one." The man's eyes flickered with something, pity, perhaps, or recognition. But he didn't challenge her words. Instead, he stepped closer, just enough for her to see the crest embroidered faintly on his cloak, a lion carved in gold thread, the mark of the royal family of Mukunda. He noticed her eyes drop to it and offered a faint grin. "You see too well to be ignored," he said. "That's dangerous in a place like this." Zola said nothing. He turned as if to leave, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Keep singing," he said. "The right ears are closer than you think." With that, he disappeared into the trees as quietly as he had come, his cloak vanishing into the shadows. Zola stood frozen for a long moment. She didn't know who he was, not exactly, but something in her bones told her he was not merely a traveler. His words echoed in her chest. "The right ears are closer than you think." For the first time, her song didn't feel like a secret or a burden. It felt like a door. She smiled, just a little. Not because she'd been praised, plenty of people had mocked her voice before. But because for once, someone had listened, truly listened, without laughter or fear. He hadn't asked her to stop. He hadn't asked her to explain. He had simply heard her, and left her with a promise. And in that quiet forest, under a sun that warmed her skin and leaves that whispered encouragement, Zola felt something she'd never felt before. Not just heard. Seen. The morning sun broke over Enturo with golden streaks, but the village was already buzzing with urgency and unrest. Bright fabrics fluttered from homes, the scent of roasted plantains and spiced yam filled the air, and everywhere, people were preparing for what was meant to be the most important day in their village's history. The rain festival was always a grand affair, but this year it had been transformed into a stage for ambition. Chief Akambo paced like a rooster in a borrowed crown, eyes scanning for anything out of place. His daughter, Ayanda, stood at the center of it all, cloaked in purple beads and gold-trimmed cloth, her hair styled high and proud. She was to perform the festival's praise song, an honor bestowed upon no one before her from Enturo's history. Children were lined up with clay flutes. Dancers, adorned in bells and feathers, huddled behind the stage. The air pulsed with expectation. But Zola was nowhere near the square. She had spent the morning by the riverbank, alone, singing to the reeds and pretending the day was ordinary. She knew her name would never be called. This celebration wasn't hers. Not in Enturo. Back in the village center, the festival began. The drummers pounded out rhythms that made the ground tremble. The dancers stepped forward in formation, their arms raised in reverence, faces painted in sky blue. The crowd leaned in as the rhythm quickened, and then faltered. The lead dancer tripped over her own feet. Another forgot her spin. The bells clashed awkwardly, and the line collapsed like sticks in a river current. Gasps swept through the watching crowd. Chief Akambo winced, but forced a smile, eyes darting toward the royal tent. Then Ayanda stepped forward, shoulders back, eyes set. The drummers struck a soft beat, and she opened her mouth. Her first note was sharp. The second, flat. She strained for pitch but missed it entirely, twisting the sacred melody into a series of mismatched notes. Her voice was thin, cracking under pressure, and she sang the Sky Guardian's name in the wrong tone again. The crowd remained silent, but not from awe. From fear. No one dared speak while the chief's daughter stood in the spotlight. Not even the elders, who shuffled awkwardly. The musicians looked down, ashamed. In the shaded royal tent, a man in rich robes leaned on his hand, face unreadable. It was the traveler from the woods. The one who had listened quietly as Zola sang to the stars. Now, the crown prince of Mukunda sat before the village with boredom heavy on his brow. When Ayanda finished her final note, the silence that followed was suffocating. Akambo forced applause. A performance worthy of the spirits, he called. His voice was too loud. Too desperate. The prince remained still. Then, after a long pause, he spoke, not to the chief, but to the crowd. "Is there anyone else in Enturo," he asked, "who can sing?" His tone was neutral, but the question sliced through the air like a blade. Whispers broke out. Backs straightened. Eyes darted. Chief Akambo's smile twitched. "No one trained, my lord," he said quickly. "The girl you heard is our finest." The prince raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" From somewhere near the back, a small voice piped up. "Zola sings better." All heads turned. It was a boy, no more than 8, standing on tiptoes, pointing toward the edge of the crowd. "She sings to the trees. She healed a deer with a song." Akambo's eyes burned with fury. "Silence that child." But the crowd was already shifting. Murmurs grew louder. "Zola should sing. She knows the old songs. Even the spirits listen to her." The prince's eyes scanned the people. "Bring her forward," he said. Akambo hesitated. "My lord, she is not fit for court. A girl of no family. Her mother was." "I asked for a singer," the prince interrupted. "Not a pedigree." A pair of guards moved into the crowd. In moments, Zola was found, breathless and confused, still holding her water gourd. She was pulled gently, but firmly, into the square. The crowd parted. Some snickered. Others shook their heads. "This again," someone muttered. "Didn't she cry the last time?" Zola stood frozen, the entire village watching, laughter already curling at the edges. The chief's daughter looked away in disgust. Zola's hands trembled. The prince nodded once. "Sing." Zola didn't move. Not at first. But then, slowly, her eyes rose, not to the crowd, not to her tormentors, but to the sky. She remembered her grandmother's voice. "Sing with your bones, child. Not just your lips." She closed her eyes. And she sang. No instruments. No dance. Just one voice, soft at first, then rising like morning mist. The melody wrapped around the ears of those who'd mocked her. It danced through the gaps in their pride. The song she sang was not a hymn of glory or power, it was sorrow and rain, memory and hope, wound into sound. The wind hushed. The leaves stilled. Even the drums dared not echo. When she reached the final note, it shimmered like sunlight on water, fading slowly into silence. And this time, there was no laughter. Only breathless stillness. Only awe. Zola's final note still hovered in the air like incense, shimmering between the breath of the trees and the stunned silence of the crowd. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the birds, so used to flitting and chirping at every sound, had gone still in the branches above. The wind, which had danced lightly through the festival just moments before, now hung motionless, as if pausing to listen to the echo of something sacred. Then, a sound broke the stillness, not a word, not applause. It was the soft gasp of an old woman, one of the elders sitting at the front of the crowd. Her hands had risen to her face, eyes wide and brimming. "I've heard that song before," she whispered. Another elder beside her nodded slowly, tears sliding silently down his cheek. "Emily," he murmured. That was her song. Zola's eyes, still closed, fluttered open as the silence broke into murmurs. Her heart beat wildly in her chest, not from fear, but from the weight of something powerful she could not name. She didn't know what had happened, only that something had changed in the air, in the eyes of the people, in the way the trees themselves seemed to lean toward her. The prince stood. His face, unreadable for so long, now bore a quiet awe. He stepped forward, out from under the shade of the royal canopy, and into the full light of the day. The villagers parted for him without a word, clearing a path between him and Zola. He stopped just before her, eyes locked with hers. "This," he said softly, but with a voice that carried like thunder, "is the voice that carries the truth of this land." Gasps erupted all around. Chief Akambo's face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Ayanda shrank behind her father, rage and confusion swirling in her eyes. The crowd, stunned only moments before, now buzzed with disbelief, wonder, and shame. Zola's lips parted to speak, but no words came. Her knees shook. The weight of the moment pressed into her chest. Her fingers twitched around the folds of her skirt as if trying to hold on to something real. Then the world spun. Her vision dimmed at the edges. Her body, trembling in light, could no longer hold the rush of emotion and memory and fear. The last thing she saw was the prince reaching out, arms steady, before the darkness took her. She fainted. When Zola awoke, it was to the scent of rosewater and soft linen beneath her cheek. She blinked and found herself lying on a woven mat under the shaded canopy of the royal tent. Her heart pounded as reality returned in fragments, the festival, the crowd, the prince's words, the song. Her song. A hand touched her shoulder. She turned and saw a royal healer kneeling beside her. "You are safe," the woman said gently. "Rest easy, child." But before Zola could even sit up fully, the tent's entrance parted. The prince stepped in. His crown was absent, but his presence filled the space. His gaze met hers, calm, curious, and warm. "You sang an ancient melody," he said. "One I have only heard once before. In the palace. From a woman the court called a spirit disguised as flesh." Zola sat up slowly. "My mother," she whispered. "Her name was Emily." He nodded. "So it is true." "What is?" she asked, voice barely audible. "That the magic your mother carried was never lost," he said. "Only buried by the fear of small men." Zola's throat tightened. Her fingers clutched the fabric of her skirt. She didn't know what to say. All her life, her voice had been a source of ridicule. Now, this man, this prince, spoke of it like it was a treasure. "I only sang what I knew," she said. "What lived inside me." He studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside and called toward the tent's entrance. A guard appeared. "Prepare a place in the palace," the prince said, his tone smooth but commanding. "This girl comes with us, not as a servant, but as a guest of the royal house." The guard's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and disappeared. Zola froze. "The palace," she breathed. "You belong somewhere your voice is honored," the prince replied. "Not punished." Outside the tent, the villagers had fallen into debate and chaos. Whispers flew faster than birds, "She's the daughter of Amelie. The spirits have returned. We shamed her, and now look." Chief Acambo paced, panicked, trying to salvage his dignity. "She bewitched him," he muttered to anyone who would listen. "She must have used trickery." But no one believed him anymore. The elders had recognized the melody. The people had felt the shift. The wind had bowed to her voice, and the prince had named her truth aloud. Zola emerged from the tent some time later, her steps still unsteady, her face pale but firm. As she moved through the crowd, escorted not by guards but by royal attendants, people made way for her with wide eyes. Some bowed. Others averted their gaze in shame. No one laughed. Not this time. Not ever again. The journey to the palace was a blur of horses, silk-covered carriages, and wide, endless roads. Zola sat silently, her heart an ocean of tangled currents, fear, wonder, memory. The villagers had watched her departure in silence, their eyes a mix of shame, regret, and awe. She had left with only a small bundle in her lap and her grandmother's whispered blessing echoing in her ears, "Go where your song is safe." Now, days later, she stood at the gates of the palace of Mukunda. It was a place beyond imagining. Marble steps stretched wide like the open wings of a bird. Giant carved doors stood tall, painted with the history of kings and queens long past. Guards in sapphire robes stood at attention, their spears polished to mirrors. Inside, the floors gleamed so brightly that Zola hesitated to step on them, afraid she'd leave a mark. Everything glittered, gold trim on the ceilings, delicate light filtering through stained glass, walls painted with scenes of battles, spirits, and suns rising from water. But what struck her most was the silence. Unlike in Turo, where the village echoed with the chatter of people, chickens, and children, the palace spoke only in whispers. Her footsteps seemed loud, even when she tiptoed. The servants moved like shadows. The tapestries swayed like ghosts in the corners. The place felt like a breathing thing that listened to every heartbeat. The prince had her escorted to a guest chamber, more luxurious than anything she'd known. There were silken cushions, a mirror taller than she was, and a silver bowl filled with rose petals floating in water. Yet for all its beauty, Zola felt out of place, like a bird in a jeweled cage. That evening, the prince visited her. "You look like someone who's walked into a dream," he said with a smile. "I feel like someone who might wake up any second," she replied. "You won't," he assured. "Not unless you choose to." He explained that the royal council had heard of her voice and requested she sing before them. "Not a performance," he said, "but a truth. Something from your bones. Just as you sang before." Zola nodded. She could do that. She had nothing else to offer but the truth in her voice. The next morning, she began training with the court musicians. The palace had entire halls dedicated to music, rooms filled with stringed instruments, flutes carved from crystal, and drums with skins so fine they sang with the lightest touch. The master musician, a stern man named Bako, tested her voice. He tapped her throat lightly, listened to her breath, and raised an eyebrow. "You do things without knowing how," he said. "That is either dangerous, or divine." He agreed to teach her, but Zola quickly learned that not everyone welcomed her. Some of the palace singers, trained for years in etiquette and melody, watched her with thin smiles and whispering mouths. "She sings like a wild thing," one muttered. "No technique. Just noise wrapped in luck." But others stared with awe. "She made the rain stall," one younger flutist whispered. Even the trees listened. Zola ignored the whispers. She learned quickly, but she never abandoned her way, her mother's way, of singing from memory and spirit, not just training. And when Bako heard her sing again, even he did not interrupt. But the palace held more than music. One day, while wandering a long hallway near the western garden, Zola met an old nurse with a bent back and bright eyes. The woman studied her face and froze. "Child," she said, stepping closer. "What song did you sing for the council?" Zola, confused, hummed a few notes. The nurse's eyes filled instantly. "I knew it. I knew that voice would return one day." You've heard it before? Zola asked. Yes, the nurse said. Years ago. From a woman who came here to heal the king. Zola's breath caught. What was her name? Emily, the nurse whispered. She sang at night by the king's door when no medicine worked. Her voice carried something that soothed the bones. It put him to sleep when even the spirits refused. Zola's chest ached with something sharp and beautiful. Her mother had been here. Not just in Inturo, not just in whispers, but here, in this very palace, wrapped in moonlight and song. The nurse led her to a smaller, older wing of the palace. The halls were dimmer here, the paintings older. They passed a mural half faded with time, an image of a woman singing to a tree that bloomed under her voice. Zola stared. She didn't know the artist, but the posture of the woman, the curve of her jaw, it was unmistakable. Then, they reached a small door tucked beneath a stone arch. It was hers, the nurse said. The room she stayed in. Zola stepped inside. The room was bare but carried a feeling, like a scent you could almost remember. She touched the wall near the bed and froze. Carved into the wood was a single word, Emily. Her knees weakened, and she sat on the edge of the bed, fingers tracing the letters. On the small writing desk lay scraps of parchment, weathered and yellowed. Some had lyrics, incomplete but powerful. One note read, "If the voice cannot change the world, then let it remember it." Zola gathered the pages in her lap. Here, her mother had lived. Not as an outcast, not as a curse, but as a healer. A singer. A name. And now, her voice had returned. Zola rose, her hand still clutching the carved name on the wall. The palace was not just stone and gold, it was a house of echoes. And through its halls, her mother's song had never stopped traveling. Now, it had found its way home. The palace was full of music, but beneath it ran silence, deep, forgotten silence. Zola had begun exploring the older wings of the palace in quiet hours, always drawn by something she couldn't name. The hallways where dust gathered on statues and old lanterns hung crooked were colder, but her steps always returned there. It was as if her mother's song had left echoes in the stones, and Zola was following the trail. One day, her hand brushed against a loose panel behind a faded tapestry. It shifted with a soft groan, revealing a narrow spiral staircase curving down into darkness. Her heart pounded, but she lit a lamp and stepped down. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with forgotten things. Cobwebs clung to the edges of the stones. When she reached the bottom, a heavy wooden door stood sealed shut. The handle resisted, but then creaked open with a long sigh. What lay beyond was a chamber carved entirely from stone, walls bare, a single rusted chair bolted to the center, and iron rings once meant for chains. Zola froze. The air held a stillness that gripped her chest. There were carvings in the walls, names, not many, but one was familiar. Emily. She stepped closer, fingers trembling as they traced each letter. This was no guest room. This was a prison. A faded cloth lay abandoned in the corner. And etched into the stone behind the chair, a line in her mother's handwriting, "The voice may be caged, but not silenced." Tears welled in Zola's eyes. The nurse had been right. Her mother had been here, but not honored, not remembered. Imprisoned. Hidden. A folder of old documents lay under a loose tile beside the chair. Pages crisp with age but preserved. Zola opened them slowly, her breath held tight in her lungs. They were transcripts, records from the palace tribunal. Her mother had been summoned to heal the king during a strange illness. The prince, then just a boy, had not slept for weeks, and the king's life was said to hang on the edge of something unnatural. Emily had sung by his side for 7 nights. And he had awoken, strong and whole. But envy follows light. A noble from the court, Lord Menro, had accused her of using forbidden enchantments. Claimed her song had bound the king's mind, not healed it. That her presence was part of a plot to weaken the crown. The records showed her sentence, treason by enchantment. Zola's hands shook. It was a lie. A cover for fear and power. Her mother had saved the king, and they had locked her away in return. But the last page held a surprise. The prison door had been found open weeks later. Emily was gone. Vanished. No trace. The record ended in silence. Zola sank to the floor of the chamber, surrounded by stone and stories buried in shame. She closed her eyes and touched the ground where her mother had once walked. Then, she began to sing. Not loud. Not proud. A quiet, yearning song, the same lullaby her mother had hummed when Zola was very small. The same one that had shaped her bones in the cradle. Her voice trembled but held steady as she poured every note into the stones. If you're still out there, she thought, if you remember. She sang as if her voice could crack the walls. As if it could reach into forests, into time, into dreams. As if music was not just sound, but a bridge. The air changed. Not dramatically, not with thunder, but softly. A single feather floated down from a gap in the stone ceiling. It drifted like a snowflake, landing gently in her lap. It was white, tinged at the edges with gold, like the kind her grandmother had described in tales from her youth. A sign from the spirit realm. A mark of truth whispered back. Zola stared. A memory surfaced, Nana Lumo's old voice telling her, when you speak truth into a place of pain, sometimes the spirits answer not with words, but with signs. This was a sign. Not of finality. But of connection. Zola rose slowly, holding the feather in her hand like a gift from the wind. Her mother had been here. Had been punished. But not broken. She had escaped. She had returned to the wild, to the only place that would hold her in peace. Zola knew now. The forest had not stolen her mother. It had protected her. She closed her eyes once more and whispered, I will find you. And the stone chamber, once cold and cruel, felt warmer than ever before. The court was called to order under the golden dome of the Hall of Memory, an honor reserved only for matters of great weight. Its wide floor was inlaid with polished stone shaped like sun rays, and the royal banners hung above like guardians of justice. Nobles, elders, advisors, and musicians lined the chamber, their eyes shifting nervously. Whispers echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Few knew exactly why they'd been summoned. Fewer still expected what came next. The crown prince stepped forward, robes dark, eyes fierce with quiet purpose. There is a wound in this court, he began, one covered in silence for too long. The murmurs ceased. Zola stepped beside him, dressed in simple robes the color of twilight. Her hair was braided in long coils, and a single golden feather hung around her neck. She clutched nothing but her breath and her voice. I bring before you a name long buried, the prince said. Amelia Venturo. A healer. A singer. A woman falsely accused. Gasps rippled through the court. Some elders shifted uncomfortably. Others bowed their heads. She was punished for treason by enchantment, the prince continued. But we now have reason to believe she was neither traitor nor sorceress, but savior. He stepped back. Zola stepped forward. And she sang. Her voice rose without fanfare, without instrument, but with a clarity that cut through the room like light through smoke. She sang her mother's full melody, its original form. Not the softened lullaby whispered in hiding, but the whole song, a tale woven in ancient rhythm, each verse unfolding like a confession. The court heard of the sick king and the sleepless nights. They heard of Amelie's healing in the voice that wrapped around pain like balm. But then came the verses none had heard before, about envy in the palace, a noble's hatred, a false accusation. The betrayal of a truth-bringer. The final verse told not of rage, but forgiveness. A hope for a time when voices could return, and wounds be named. As the last note faded, silence fell again, but not cold, not heavy. One of the elders rose slowly. A man with eyes sunken from age and years of secrets. I was there, he said, voice shaking. I remember the trial. All eyes turned to him. She did not curse the king, he said, his voice cracking. She saved him. But Menro, he feared her. feared the people's love for her. So he whispered lies. And he faltered, I was too afraid to speak. I let her be taken. Tears ran down his face. I have lived in shame since. Her voice haunts my sleep. The court was stunned. Then came the sound of the king's staff striking the floor. The old king, now frail and silver-haired, stood slowly, helped by 2 attendants. His eyes, once clouded by age, were wide with grief. I remember her, he said. In the darkness. I remember the song that brought me back from death. And I remember the silence after she was taken. He turned to Zola. Your mother saved my life. And we destroyed hers. For that, I beg forgiveness. Then he raised his staff high. Let her name be restored. Let her daughter be honored. He looked at Zola with steady eyes. From this day forward, Zola of Inturo shall be known as keeper of the voice, guardian of truth and song, and bearer of memory for the kingdom. Applause did not erupt. It began slowly, an echo of claps, rising, catching fire. Musicians stood in respect. The elders bowed their heads. Even the most skeptical of nobles offered silent nods. Zola stood, still as stone, but inside, her heart bloomed with warmth too deep for words. Her mother's name had been lifted from the dust. And her own voice had become something more than defiance. It had become justice. The tree still stood on the edge of Inturo, where the forest met the sky. Its branches reached like arms outstretched in prayer, leaves trembling in the breeze like they remembered every note ever sung beneath them. And now, beneath those roots that once bore witness to a girl's tears, a statue had been placed, graceful, carved from white stone, and shaped in the likeness of Zola. Her face tilted upward in song, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, caught in a moment of music that never faded. Children gathered at its base, mimicking her pose, daring each other to sing. Where once there had been mocking laughter, now there were curious voices. Where once no one listened, now all who passed bowed in quiet reverence. The plaque beneath the statue read. She sang truth into silence, and silence learned to sing. Zola's return to Inturo had been brief but beautiful. The villagers, awkward with remorse, welcomed her with hesitant smiles and eyes that barely met hers. But she did not come for revenge. She came for her grandmother. Nanalumo was fading like the last ember of a long-burning fire. Her skin was parchment thin, her voice reduced to little more than breath. But her eyes, oh, her eyes, held joy like a sunrise when Zola entered the hut. You did it, Nana whispered, fingers tracing Zola's cheek. The voice, it reached the sky. Zola knelt beside her, cradled her grandmother's frail hand in her lap, and sang. It was not a grand performance. Just a quiet lullaby, woven with love and memory, the same song her mother had once sung to her. As the final note drifted through the room, Nanalumo sighed and smiled, and her breath slipped peacefully from her body, like a spirit being sung home. Zola buried her with honor beneath the baobab tree, wrapped in cloth woven with musical symbols, and feathers sewn into the hem. Then she returned to the palace, not in shame, not in silence, but as keeper of the voice. And the halls were never quiet again. She opened the royal music halls to girls from every village, including those as small and forgotten as Inturo. Girls with strange voices. Girls who sang to trees, to rivers, to wind. Girls once silenced by shame. She taught them not just notes and rhythm, but courage. Sing, she would say, even if the world turns its back. Especially then. Choirs of truth-tellers soon filled the kingdom, songs in every tongue, carrying the old stories with new breath. The palace echoed with melodies it had never known, and the people listened. And when Zola walked through the market square or climbed the hills near the river, even the wind seemed to hush, as if waiting. Because now, the world wanted to hear her hum. Final line. She was once mocked for her voice, now the world waits to hear her hum.